Of course, during the course of these events, we see Lawrence get shot in the arm, and then he just sort of stands there looking at the shooter as the shooter continues to take shots at him and misses, until Auda comes over and just kills him with a sword. The journalist is finally going to get a sit down with Lawrence after this, and he asks Lawrence, "What's the goal here for you?" And Lawrence says, "Arab freedom." Of course, the journalist is a cynic, and he sort of chuckles at this. Yeah, right, England's going to pass up an opportunity to have another colony.
That's a good one.
Welcome back to another episode of The Rank. I'm John, and today I'm going to be continuing in my quest to rank all of the Best Picture nominees. Now, for those of you who are new to the show, I'm going to give you a brief agenda here. I start off with the potent notables, which are just a few interesting facts or tidbits that I found out about the movie. Then I do the movie overview, which is where I talk about everything that happened in the movie. So, spoiler alert. And then I do the namesake of the show, The Rank, where I rank the movie in 10 categories on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, all to figure out what are the Best Picture nominees of all time. And today I'm going to be ranking the 1962 epic Lawrence of Arabia, starring Peter O'Toole, Alec Guinness, Omar Sharif, and Anthony Quinn. It was partially adapted from the autobiography by T.E. Lawrence called 7 Pillars of Wisdom, with a screenplay written by Robert Bolt and Michael Wilson. And Michael Wilson was actually not credited originally because he was blacklisted due to the communist scare. And if you want to hear more about that, you can check out The Bridge on the River Kwai. I talk about that in more detail. But it was also directed by David Lean, as was The Bridge on the River Kwai, actually. Now, Lawrence of Arabia was nominated for 10 Academy Awards, winning 7. The 7 categories it did win: Best Art and Set Decoration, Best Cinematography, Best Score, Best Film Editing, Best Sound, Best Director, and of course, Best Picture. So this would be the first of the movies that came out in 1962 that I'm going to be ranking, and it just so happens to be the one that won. So we'll find out soon enough if the Academy got it right, and how it ranks against the all-timers that I've ranked so far, starting with the potent notables.
Potent notables.
So as always, we start the potent notables with the box office info. Lawrence of Arabia made $37.5 million domestically on its initial run in 1962 and 63, and I didn't get any numbers internationally for its initial run. However, it's been re-released several times, and because of that, its domestic total actually went up to $45.3 million, and according to thenumbers.com, $32.5 million internationally, which means it has a worldwide total of $70 million. And this was against a budget of $15 million. So it was a pretty decent hit even in its time. So on to the other potent notables. King Hussein of Jordan lent an entire brigade of his Arab Legion as extras for this movie. So most of the film's soldiers are actual soldiers. But what's interesting is King Hussein came to set frequently and became enamored with a British secretary, Antoinette Gardner, who ended up becoming his second wife in 1962. Their eldest son, Abdullah II, became King of Jordan in 1999 when he ascended to the throne. Now, despite King Hussein being involved in this movie was actually banned in a lot of Arab countries. They felt that Arab historical figures and Arab people would be misrepresented. But Omar Sharif arranged a viewing with Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser to show him that there was nothing wrong with the way they were portrayed. Nasser ended up loving the movie and it allowed it to be released in Egypt, where it became a huge hit. This movie took longer to make than it did for the real T.E. Lawrence to go from lieutenant to colonel, and to see the desert tribes united and tip the balance of the war against the Turks in the Arabs' favor. I also think it may have taken me just as long to watch it. Now, in the actual Battle of Aqaba, T.E. Lawrence was nearly killed when a camel threw him after accidentally shooting the camel in the head. In a notable coincidence, during filming, Peter O'Toole was also nearly killed. A gun or rocket that was used to signal action for the Aqaba battle scene went off early and spooked the camel, which then threw Peter O'Toole off the camel in front of a whole bunch of charging horses. Now, there are other accounts that say O'Toole fell off the camel because he'd been drinking too much. Fortunately for O'Toole, the camel, who was trained for such mishaps, stood over him and prevented him from being trampled. It's a nice camel. And finally, though there are a lot more potent notables, T.E. Lawrence's brother A.W. Lawrence, who was also executor of the will, demanded script approval before he allowed them to use Lawrence's autobiography, 7 Pillars of Wisdom. Eventually, he wasn't keen on the film's portrayal of his brother, so he wouldn't allow them to use the title for the film. Now, I have to say, I think Lawrence of Arabia is a better title, so I think he did them a favor, actually. But those are all the potent notables. Let's go to the movie overview. Okay, so right away, I thought this movie was glitching or something. I rented it on Amazon, and It was just playing music on a black screen. But you know how like Amazon puts up the trivia tidbits and stuff on the screen? Well, it was talking about the opening credits, so I thought, seems wrong, right? I'm not seeing opening credits, it's just music playing. So I started skipping ahead, and finally at about 4.5 minutes, there was actually something on the screen. It was the opening credits. And I thought, that's really weird. Let me just Google it. So I Googled it, and turns out, yes, that was meant to be there. 4.5 minutes of blank screen where they're just playing the score. So just to make sure I got the full feeling, I went back and I watched 4.5 minutes of blank screen and listened to the score. Now, I'm not going to say that David Lean didn't know what he was doing, but you know, this is just one aspect that maybe could have been cut to conserve some time. Just a thought. You know, 4 hours seems unnecessary to me, but maybe it's just me. Because you know what? After 4.5 minutes of blank screen, we get another 2 minutes of opening credits. So we're nearly 6.5 minutes into the movie before anything is actually happening. And we open with a guy on a motorcycle, and the way that they're filming it, things are just getting faster and faster. It definitely felt ominous. And I was right to feel that way because he's gonna end up crashing the bike and dying in a very old school cinema kind of way, where they don't really show it happening. It's just kind of like, they show him going like this, and then, so we infer what's happened. And then there's a funeral with a bunch of people walking around being like, does he really deserve all of this acclaim? People being like, I didn't really know him. And nobody that was there was like, oh, I really knew this guy. Nobody really knew him. And that's sort of how we start things off, with this one guy just being like, I knew him somewhat. He was basically an underling that I had him doing odd jobs during World War I. So him saying that transitions us to meeting Lawrence for, I guess, the second time since we saw him die, but we didn't really know it was him. Anyway, he's bored and he's drawing on a map. This movie is going to spend a lot of time showing us how much Lawrence is actually a manly man. Like when he puts out a match with his fingers. And when another guy tries it, he's like, ow, that really hurts. And then Lawrence is like, yeah, the trick is to not care if it hurts. We're also shown throughout the movie the way he doesn't ingratiate himself to his superior officers. That he's got a streak of independence in him that doesn't really suit the military lifestyle. His commanding officer doesn't like him, but he's cajoled by some mysterious political puppeteer to let Lawrence go to Arabia and be with the other military attaché that's there in the guise of reporting. Now, to get to Arabia, Lawrence is going to need a guide. The guide is going to be a guy named Tatus. And here with Tatus, we're going to get a sense of what David Lean is going to be leaning into with this movie.
Oh, brother.
The camera is going to show us these amazing desert vistas, and we're going to spend an inordinate amount of time with Lawrence traveling in said vistas. Now, I understand that they mean to show the landscape as both beautiful and unforgiving, and how difficult it's going to be for Lawrence, but we dwell on it way too much. I mean, this was at least 30 minutes of screen time, and here's the synopsis. Lawrence befriends his guide so that we can see the beginning of how he's going to ingratiate himself with the Arabs. His guide gets shot. Lawrence stands up to the killer to show his tenacity and fearlessness. Then he ends up getting to Prince Faisal, which is where he was heading, to show his grit and determination. I'm sorry, but that could have been told a lot faster and just as impactfully. But fine. Let's just say you're going to take this amount of time to show these characteristics of his personality. Then stop doing it in other moments. But on his way to Faisal on his own, he runs into the military attaché that was already there, who also happens to outrank him, and this officer tells him, Lawrence, just don't say anything. But because of what they've already established, we already know Lawrence is not going to do that. So eventually, when they're having a military council with Prince Faisal, Lawrence can't help but speak his mind. The British officer wants the Arabs to fall back to the British position, but Lawrence knows that if they do that, they become just another division within the British army, and basically, they become colonized by England. So he recommends that they take Aqaba by land from behind, which the Ottoman Turks won't be expecting, and is a crazy march through the desert. So then we get another hour of harrowing journey to Aqaba. I'm mostly okay with the length of time this takes because I know the point of it is to show how hard it is to take an army through the desert. Plus, the whole point is to show how Lawrence unites the tribes of Arabs and why that would be difficult. They have to show that there's no love lost between these tribes in the desert. They do this by having Lawrence and his Hariths run into the Howitat. The conflict actually stems from the exact same conflict that got his guide Tatus killed earlier. These Arabs don't like when people are drinking from their wells that are not from their tribe. And actually, the guy who ends up becoming Lawrence's best friend is the guy who killed Tatus, Sheriff Ali. Naturally, not only do things not come to blows, but Lawrence is able to convince Auda, the tribal leader of the Howitat, to join them on their crusade to Aqaba. And against all odds, they're successful. So this is the beginning of Lawrence becoming a hero. It's hard for me to take this too seriously because I sort of found this whole hero worshipping of a white man in Arabia to be a little too thick. Basically, Lawrence is setting himself up to be sort of godlike to these people, and he keeps winning, so they're starting to believe in his personality cult. It seems like we're meant to believe that Lawrence abhors violence and death. He loses one of his 2 kid servants to quicksand. He had to execute a guy to keep the peace between the Hariths and the Howitats, and that guy he executed was the one that he actually went back for earlier in the movie to save from the desert. But then, when he goes back to Cairo and he's explaining this to his new commanding general, he's trying to get out of all this, and he says part of the problem is that he liked killing the guy, which I found confusing, because he certainly didn't act like he liked it. But while he's trying to get away from the war, the general keeps stroking his ego to keep him in it. He sees Lawrence's value in occupying the Turks on a different front. But the point here is that we're starting to see that with every victory, with every ego stroke, Lawrence is starting to believe that he's more than just a man. And the more that he leads the Arabs, the more that Ali, and I'm sure some of the others, develop a chip on their shoulder about how he's going to go back and tell the English that they're barbarous and uncivilized until Lawrence eventually does win them over, according to the movie. Of course, Lawrence isn't going to see this, but the audience sees the duplicity with which the British army deals with Lawrence and the Arabs. Of course, Lawrence is going to suspect it, but he still doesn't really know. So they promise to give him a whole bunch of stuff, and they give him most of it, but they don't give him artillery. And that's because the whole idea here is you got to keep the Arab army little. And this realization is right when they hit intermission. So we are 2.5 hours into this movie with an hour and a half to go. So after intermission, we're reintroduced to the story by an American journalist. He's eager to meet up with Lawrence because he wants to write about a hero. He's trying to get Americans interested in going to war. So Lawrence is the kind of swashbuckling adventurer that Americans love to read about. So through him, we get back to Lawrence, who's busy blowing up Turkish trains and looting the cars. So basically, they've become bandits. Of course, during the course of these events, we see Lawrence get shot in the arm, and then he just sort of stands there looking at the shooter as the shooter continues to take shots at him and misses, until Auda comes over and just kills him with a sword. The journalist is finally going to get a sit down with Lawrence after this, and he asks Lawrence, "What's the goal here for you?" And Lawrence says, "Arab freedom." Of course, the journalist is a cynic, and he sort of chuckles at this. Yeah, right, England's going to pass up an opportunity to have another colony.
That's a good one.
But Lawrence, in earnest, insists that they're going to have their freedom because he's going to give it to them. So we're starting to get a sense here of how large his ego has become. He's starting to see himself as invincible. He keeps pressing on, campaigning, even though a lot of his troops are leaving. They're getting what they want from looting and they're just going home. Then his other kid servant accidentally blows himself up trying to blow up the train tracks, and this starts a crack in Lawrence's psyche. He keeps losing people, but he needs to prove to himself that he's more than just a man, that he's some sort of divine fate. So he's decided he's going to try to take a city with the 20 to 50 people he has left. But to do so, he knows he needs more people, right? So he's going to go into the city and try to recruit as many revolutionaries as he can. But his belief in his fate here is so strong that he's just sort of announcing himself to everybody. So what happens? He gets captured. And luckily for him, they didn't realize who he was, or else I bet they would have turned him in for the 20,000 pound bounty that was on his head. So he's taken to the governor of this city, and this is where this crack turns into a break. This governor seems to be interested in Lawrence sexually, and according to Lawrence's autobiography, he intimates strongly that the governor made him do sexual acts, which the governor denied. So after he punches the governor for him touching his boobie, he ends up getting hit with a stick for a bit. Now, I'm sure in real life that hurt a lot, and I'm sure that there was actually more torture than that. But from my vantage point, Lawrence really turns into a bitch here. He's like, my back hurts, so I'm just like a mere mortal now. I want to go home. Yeah, he's basically scared to go back. So he's like, I want to go home. I want to get out of here. I'm not the man that I thought I was. I'm just a man. It's really pretty pathetic. He just leaves all of these troops that have been following him in a lurch. Now, I'm not sitting here saying I could stand up to torture. I'm just saying this did not make me like him very much. When he gets back, he again tries to convince the general to let him go home, but the general's actually there with Prince Faisal and the creepy politician guy. So what do? They all stroke his ego and try to convince him to return to Arabia, which he once again agrees to because he's like, you're right, I am extraordinary, and what of it? I mean, the outright arrogance of this guy is just like, ugh. But his arrogance isn't the only thing he's bringing with him. He's also bringing a brand new hatred, absolute hatred of the Turks because they hit him with a stick. Whereas before he was adhering to the Geneva Conventions and taking prisoners, now he's just like, fuck them all up. Kill as many as you can. One battle scene shows this particularly as he ignores Sharif Ali's counsel and goes after a Turkish platoon with the battle cry, "No prisoners!" And not only does he allow the killing of the Turks, he partakes in it. When he runs out of bullets, he just starts stabbing people. Now, we don't actually see him do the stabbing, but it's inferred as when Ali finds him, he's just standing there with his knife in his hand and he's covered in blood. The chip on Ali's shoulder comes back as he's saying to the American journalist, "Who else but the Arabs would do this, right? The barbarous Arabs." But the journalist knows he's looking at Lawrence and he's going like, "You absolute monster piece of shit." But I think what Ali is hurt by most is Lawrence's fall from grace here. Here's the thing about this portion of the film. The story is about how he united the various Arab tribes, but we only actually see him unite 2 tribes. When they go to Damascus, which is the end here, he's got a whole bunch more Arab troops, but the intimation is that he simply bought them. So did he unite tribes or did he simply hire mercenaries? Whatever it is, they're able to take Damascus before the British can get there. And to this end, Faisal is able to use this to get a free Arabia, in which he can be king, which tanks the British and French agreement to split up the Ottoman Empire amongst themselves when they win the war. But what is really clear here is that both Allenby and Faisal were playing the same game, although Allenby didn't realize that Faisal was playing it. And the game they were playing was using Lawrence as a pawn to get what they wanted. And Lawrence never really learns that he was a pawn in their game, but I'm sure he suspected it. As we end with an allusion to the beginning. He's being driven off and the driver is saying how it's great, sir, you're gonna get to go home. Isn't that great? And then a motorcycle speeds past them. But that's the whole movie. Let's find out how it ranked.
A rank.
So the rank is where I rank the movie based on 10 categories: story, acting, originality, film coherence, cinematography, score/soundtrack/sound, script structure and dialogue, character relatability, production value, and my rank. I rank it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. But before I dive into the rankings here, I just want to say if you're enjoying this episode, please leave a like down below. It really does help me out. But without further ado, the first category is story. So the story of T.E. Lawrence is definitely a fascinating one. It was more nuanced than I expected it to be honest. I thought it was going to be some white savior stuff, which it kind of was, but I liked that it showed the duplicity of global politics and even local politics. So I gave it a 9.25. So that brings us to acting. I wasn't super enamored with the acting in this. There was a lot of that old school overacting. It wasn't terrible or anything, but I thought a lot of Peter O'Toole's acting was really over the top, especially the quiet moments. He was a lot better when he was talking than when he was physically acting. I thought Omar Sharif was excellent though. His portrayal was subtle and grounded, and his emotional moments weren't done over dramatically. Alec Guinness was begrudgingly decent in this, but it's definitely weird to watch an Englishman in brownface pretend to be an Arab. Anyway, I ended up giving it a 7. So let's go to originality. I'm not really sure about this category. For one thing, it's a war film, so that's not original. However, the scale and scope feels original to me. I mean, they were really trying to not just show another war movie, but dive into another culture for the audience. Of course, this is back when movies were centered around white, European, and American sensibilities, and you can feel that when you watch it. But they tried, so that's gotta be worth some originality points, right? I gave it an 8. So let's go to film coherence. This movie is way longer than it needed to be. That is the first and most glaring hit on coherence. We spend tons of time on some areas and very little on others. We get the sense during the first part of how he's building an Arab army. But then in the second part, he comes back and he's just got a whole bunch of people. He just bought them, I guess. Could we get some explanation of how he united the tribes? I mean, him getting to Damascus and being promoted to colonel is a lot less compelling than his immersion into Arab culture. And if you're going to present that this torture that he had from the governor of Dera or wherever it was is like the catalyst for him becoming like a bad person or changing his personality, then give us more than just hit with a stick. Other than those things, I think it's actually surprisingly coherent for the immense scale and scope and length of the picture. So I gave it a 7.5. So that brings us to cinematography. There's absolutely no denying that the cinematography in this is gorgeous. I think it struggles a little bit from looking at it from a modern lens because some of the scenes are just handled better in modern times than they were back then, especially fight, war, and death scenes. That being said, I still gave it a 9.5. So that brings us to score/soundtrack/sound. The score was epic, dramatic, and beautiful. There were definitely times though where they were playing music that didn't really make sense for the moment. Like they built ominous tension with the music, music a couple times, and then it just never paid off. And I was left wondering, why did they choose to do that? Still though, the score is incredible, so I gave it a 9. So that brings us to script structure and dialogue. I thought the dialogue was great. They presented the Arab side of things, the chip on their shoulders about how the West perceived them. I think they did that well. There was cunning to it all, and I appreciated that they didn't make Lawrence supremely likable. It was a nuanced script. That being said, some structure may have helped because it was, again, way too long. I gave it an 8.75. So that brings us to character relatability. As much as I just praised the script, I think the character work left a little to be desired. I was never super empathetic with anyone. This was presented as a biography in a way that often biographers try to be distant and not let you get enraptured by the subject. But that's what a documentary should do, not a 4-hour feature-length film. Anyway, Sharif Ali and Prince Faisal were probably the best characters. I never really cared that much about Lawrence, so I gave it a 7. So that brings us to production value, and I mean, this is absolutely the best part of the movie. Everything is gorgeous, it's well put together. You feel what it's like to be in the desert, to be in a desert city. I gave it a 10. So that brings us to my rank. I sort of had higher hopes for this one. I mean, I've always heard that this was a classic, that it was a must-watch movie. But while it wasn't terrible or anything, I felt like I just sort of sat there and watched it for 4 hours. And then the movie was over and I was like, okay, so I did that. There was no contemplation happening. I just felt like, okay, it's pretty, I guess. Basically, it's a super interesting story that's told kind of dully. I gave it a 6.5. So altogether, that puts Lawrence of Arabia at an 82.5, which makes it I'd watch it again. This ties it with Dune Part 2, which is just below Crossfire from 1947 and just above Wings from 1927. And if you're ranking along with me, drop your score in the comments. I'd be curious to see where you're different from mine. But thanks for listening and or watching. Check out my other Best Picture episodes or my other movie or sitcom episodes. Remember to subscribe, comment, and like. For up-to-date rankings, check out the website at therankpodcast.com, where you can also email me at john@therankpodcast.com. If you'd like to become a patron, you can do that at patreon.com/therankpodcast. So, it is written. But what's interesting is that King Hussein actually frequently came to set and became enamored with. But what's interesting is
That's okay. Take your time.